All right, everybody, I think I'm going to get started. I think almost everybody is here, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. But first, just good morning. Thanks for coming to our webinar. This is the second of our webinar series. My name is Billy Hackett, and today I'll be talking about some ways to achieve the best results from your application of Flight Control Plus. We'll review some timing strategies, seasonal strategies, equipment, and best application techniques. All of your microphones are muted right now, but I will unmute them at the end so you can ask any questions that you might have. But before we get started on all the application techniques, I just want to quickly review how flight control works in case some of you are not as familiar with it as others. It's definitely important to understand how it works to be able to educate your customers. Flight control is a unique and patented technology that works in two ways. First is the visual warning. Unlike us, all birds can see in the UV spectrum, and flight control absorbs light in the UV spectrum, so geese can actually see it on the grass. They can tell the difference between grass treated with flight control and grass that's not treated. The second way that it works is an anti-feeding warning. When the geese actually eat the turf treated with flight control, they experience a strong but harmless digestive irritation. It's equivalent to what you and I would think of as heartburn or indigestion type feeling after a meal. It only takes them one time, but they learn not to feed on that weird looking grass. Flight control is an extremely effective method of goose control because it gives a threat with a consequence. The visual threat, the odd-looking grass, coupled with the digestive consequence from eating it, causes a learned behavior modification. So building awareness around flight control is definitely very important. Many people who have geese problems and are searching for solutions may not be aware that a product like flight control exists. It's important that you are educated on geese and how flight control works to be able to explain it to your customers. You should let your customers know that using flight control will dramatically reduce their goose droppings. If not altogether, it will reduce them dramatically. You need to be able to let them know that it is humane, it's effective, and it is eco-friendly. Unlike other methods of goose control, flight control is persistent and works 24/7. And it's important to make sure your customers know that it needs to be sold in yearly programs to be effective because geese will return to any untreated turf. It's extremely important to set realistic customer expectations. The more that you know about geese, the easier it will be for you to discuss your customers' goose concerns. I definitely suggest visiting the customer's property so you can tailor your services around their individual problems and concerns. Also, if you get to the property and you suspect that people might be hand feeding the geese there, you should definitely try to warn the property manager or whoever hires you about the dangers that come with hand feeding the geese. It's bad for the geese, and it also will reduce the effectiveness of flight control. If flight control takes away the goose's food, and if people are supplying with food, it may not work as well as it should be. What I suggest is you may even ask the manager to send a memo to the employees about your services, that your company is coming to humanely keep the geese away with the liquid application to the grass. And who knows, you may be able to pick up a new customer that way out of the employees who didn't know that something like this existed. When you're evaluating a property, be sure to consider the tolerance zones. If it's a large property and spraying the whole property may not be feasible or practical or economical, consider where on the property the geese can be tolerated. If it's a large business complex, they may just want the geese away from the main entrances or away from the parking lots or something like that. So if there's a place where the geese can be tolerated off-site or off to the back of a property, be sure you're on the lookout of that so you can come up with a better solution for the manager. Consider where the geese are coming from and consider where they will go once you repel them. They might leave the property altogether or maybe just move into a neighbor's yard. So always be on the lookout for new potential customers and have those business cards ready. Again, knowing a little background info about the seasonality of geese is important to getting started with a successful goose control program. You can start an effective program any time of year, but the results will realistically vary depending on when you start, just based on the geese themselves. In the early spring, geese are mating and nesting until about the end of May. Parents will not abandon their nests. During the summer is when the goslings are maturing and foraging. Parents, again, will not abandon their goslings at this time at all. In the mid to late summer, geese go into molt, and this is when the adults shed all of their flight feathers. At this time, none of the geese can fly at all, so they are generally stuck where they are at that time, and they're limited to wherever they want to go by walking alone. There's no flying. Later in the year, once they regain their flight feathers, they begin pond hopping and foraging throughout the fall and the winter months. So here's some seasonal treatment strategies that we find work best. The number one goal is to prevent them from nesting in the spring. If you can prevent them from nesting, you might possibly have little to no bird pressure over the next few months. So we recommend being aggressive with your applications in the early part of the year. Probably 2 to 3 applications will be needed during this time frame. For the first application of the year, we recommend going at the 1 gallon per acre rate. Any follow-up applications should go at a half gallon per acre rate. And this is because for that first half of the year, we need the geese to experience the full effect of flight control, and because this is when they actually will be eating the turf. After that first time, they simply need to see it on the turf to continue repelling them so we can reduce the rate. Again, it's during this time of year, in the early part of the year, that they're searching for that nesting site where they feel comfortable and safe, and we definitely want to make sure we're taking away their food so they can find another nesting site. During the first part of the summer into the rest of the summer, if you're successful in preventing them from nesting, you may be lucky enough to not even need to treat the area at all during this time frame. Because once the geese have nested, if they haven't nested on site, they're not going to leave their goslings because they can't fly. If you were not successful in preventing them from nesting, you need to continue spraying at the half gallon per acre rate at this time. Flight control will not wash off the grass. It's only coming off from mowing. So when applied correctly, you should be able to get about 3 to 4 mowings before the product is completely removed from the turf. So depending on where you are, if the grass growth slows down in the summer months, you can probably stretch out your summer applications a little bit. If the grass is growing slowly because of heat stress, the product won't be removed as quickly from mowing, even if people are still coming once a week to mow the grass. So if you have a good relationship with the customer that you're working with, you could ask them to let you know when the geese are starting to return. That means the product has been removed from the turf. It may be 6 weeks, it could be 7 weeks, depending on how quickly or slowly the grass is growing during this time frame. So again, if you're starting a program at this time, you need to understand and make sure your customer understands that because of being in molt, the geese can't and won't leave your property. So the best you can do during this time of year is prevent them from feeding on any turf that you treat. So into the fall and heading into the winter months, it's important to protect the properties once again, as once again the geese have regained their flight feathers. The goslings have also learned to fly by this time, and they are all pond hopping and foraging and trying to find a place to spend the winter. If you can prevent them from wintering on a property, you'll have a much better chance of preventing them from nesting in the spring. And this is another reason why it's a year-long strategy to get rid of the geese or keep the geese off of a property. The final treatment of the year should be applied after the grass has gone dormant and should be applied again at the 1 gallon per acre rate. And that is because this final application will stay on the turf all winter long into the spring, and it will prevent any residential or migratory geese from being comfortable in the area. So when you get to the property, where do you apply it? You always want to try to evaluate the property before you're making your first application. When you're evaluating the property, you definitely want to try to define and measure the drop zone. The drop zone is the active feeding area and is always well defined by goose droppings. This is the area they like the most and they're spending most of their time. You always want to treat the entire drop zone and a little bit of the area just beyond it. Again, your main goal is to take away their feeding area and force them to find a new one. You can charge your customers however you think best, but typically if they have a 1 acre property, you usually don't need to treat the entire property. Geese are usually pretty specific where they like to hang out and feed. And if you take that area away that they like, they typically won't just move a little bit farther away to begin feeding. A lot of times they'll try to find another site that's more appealing. So again, you can start a program any time of the year, but the results will vary depending on when you start. So what happens next? What happens after you apply your flight control? As the geese eat the turf, the conditioning process begins. Once they feed on that turf, it takes about 45 minutes or so for them to digest the turf. Once they have digested it, they will begin to experience the irritation in their stomachs. They will often react by honking loudly and flapping their wings and shaking their heads, acting crazy basically, and heading to water for safety. But they quickly realize that the bad meal they just got, the weird feeling they have, came from the strange-looking grass, and they learn not to feed on it again. The entire flock does need to sample the treated area, and it usually happens quicker, but sometimes it can take up to 2 or 3 days for the entire flock to eat the grass, figure out what happened, and decide to leave. So as I mentioned before, flight control only comes off the grass from mowing, so you will need multiple applications throughout the year. Again, the 1 gallon per acre rate should be the first and the last applications of the year, and anything in between can go at the half gallon per acre rate. The amount of water required for flight control to be diluted into varies depending on your equipment, but usually it will be about 7 to 20 gallons of water per acre. Generally speaking, the less water that you use, the better results that you'll get. You should always try to make sure your equipment is properly calibrated to ensure a proper application. If you're not sure if your equipment's properly calibrated, there's a bunch of online things on YouTube, step-by-step instructions on how to calibrate it. And my suggestion is, if you're not sure, definitely go check that out, because if it's not calibrated correctly, it could be costing you time, money, and giving you some bad results. And flight control is a very thick chemical, so you always want to make sure you shake it really well in the bottle and the jug before even mixing it with the water. A product that's been sitting for a while can definitely settle. So just agitating it in your mix tank may not be as effective as doing it beforehand as well. So we'll talk about some tips for getting the best results from your application. First is, your first application of the year is the most important one. It's the one that's going to set you up for having a successful season with goose control. And because of that, you want to make sure that this is the one that you do as carefully as possible. Since we're essentially trying to spray paint the turf with flight control, you want the application to cover the grass as evenly as possible. This means that you should try as best as possible to clean the area of any debris that may prevent you from getting an even application. If possible, if it's feasible at all, try to clean up the area, or even use a blower to get rid of any heavy grass clippings, any goose droppings, leaves, or sticks, or any type of debris that would prevent you from getting that good application. You always want to try to apply immediately after the grass has been mowed to extend the longevity of the application. If you spray the grass on a Monday and they come back and mow the grass on the next day on Tuesday, you basically just lost a full week of coverage on that application. So if possible, you want to try to coordinate that as best as you can. You never want to apply flight control to any wet grass. It will just run right off the blade before it has had a chance to dry on it. And if it runs off the blade, the geese obviously won't be able to eat it, and it won't work. So as a general rule, if your work boots get wet when you're walking through the grass, you shouldn't apply it. You only want to use a fan tip nozzle. The goal is to create the smallest possible droplet, or a fine mist would be ideal, one that covers the grass entirely and evenly. As with any chemical you're applying, you want to try to avoid applying it in windy conditions to avoid any drift. If you've seen flight control, if you have sprayed it before, and hopefully you have, you've seen it has a faint tan color to it. So you want to try your best to prevent it from getting on any unwanted surfaces, because again, it won't wash off. It'll be difficult to wash it off. Under normal conditions with normal humidity, flight control usually takes about 30 minutes to dry. We have a longer time on our label, but typically it's about 30 minutes. But just to be on the safe side, you should try to avoid applying 3 hours or less prior to a rainfall. And the last thing is, you want to try to avoid walking through it or dragging hoses over it, or basically any activity in the area until it has had a chance to dry. Otherwise, you run the risk of knocking it off the grass or walking it off the grass before it's dried. Once it's dried on the grass, all normal activity can resume, because once it's dried on there, it won't come off. And the people, wildlife, basically nobody but the birds will even know that it's there. So with the type of equipment that you want to use, you only want to apply flight control with a fine tip nozzle using equipment like a JD9 gun, a backpack sprayer, a weed wand, a liquid TTA unit, or a ride-on sprayer. You never want to try to apply it with a controlled droplet applicator or a Chemlon gun. There is already a sticker in flight control, so you do not need to apply one or add one under normal applications. However, we recommend adding a sticker for your last application of the year. And again, that's because this last application will be on the turf for, in some places around the country, as long as 5 months maybe. And we've seen better results with people adding a sticker for that final application. And again, you want to try to avoid any activity in the area until it's had a chance to dry. So these are some of the methods that we've seen that get the best results. If you have techniques or strategies that you want to share with us that are working really well for you, please let me know, because I'm always looking for ways to help our applicators save money and save time and get the best results they can. So we want you to be successful in geese management and using flight control, and I definitely want to try to help you in any way that I can. I'm going to unmute you all now if you have any questions that you may want to ask. All right. Anybody have any questions? If you end up having specific companies about your business, you're something I can help you with, feel free to get in touch with me afterwards. I'd be happy to help. Any questions? All right. All right. I might have still had you guys muted. Sorry about that. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Well, thank you again for your time today. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure you check us out on your favorite social media platform. And if any of you are spraying for mosquitoes or ticks, or even thinking of, contact me about trying our company's brand new all-natural mosquito repellent. It's called Stop the Bites. It's an all-natural product that kills and repels just as well as the toxins, but it's safe for people, pets, bees, and butterflies. Again, thank you all for your time today. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your days. Thanks.
Thank you.